Okay, let's see. It says that I'm live. I have made my way over to the tested offices, which are luckily close by. Uh, and uh, let's see if this actually works. I think this might. All right. Hi, everybody. Well, that was boring. Oh, wait. There we go. I think I had a dream. This is bringing up some deja vu. I seem to remember having a dream in which I was trying to do something with the fans, and I had a technical glitch, and I described it as boring. And in the dream, someone challenged me on the appellation of boring. But boring is like the phrase I use for something that is a needless hiccup. It turned out that the uploads, we just did a speed test on my Wi-Fi, and that's when we decided for me to pack up out of my shop and come over to the tested offices. Um, my upload speed was like 5 megabits per second. What? Comcast? What the hell, dude? That's in the industrialized world with a reasonable Wi-Fi plan as I have in the central tech city, San Francisco, for crying out loud. I should get better upload speeds. Thank you, Comcast. Thank you for poor service. I'm going to attempt to get some refund on my Wi-Fi this month for that. But that's all my personal business. That doesn't have anything to do with you. Here I am back online with you. We are in the middle of the third week. Maybe I get a little better framing here. We're in the middle of the third week of sheltering in place. Um, as I tried to say a couple times before with all the dumb buffering, uh, there's been a movement afoot on social media to stop calling it social distancing and start calling it uh, physical distancing. And I really appreciate that. I think that is a terrific subtlety because we need the social interaction more than ever now. We've been finding that in my house. The ability to dial up friends and have a Zoom chat or FaceTime with them has been stunning and delightful. And it feels quite reasonably immediate. That being said, I'm finding not being able to see my friends directly is maybe one of the single hardest parts about this. We have some good friends that live nearby us here in the mission, and every now and then we go over to their house and they stand out on the little stairs above the street, and we talk like Romeo and Juliet to them, and that feels very stabilizing, but also very temporary. And I miss them. I miss my friends, as I'm sure that you do too. Um, yeah, it is an intense time. So let's spend the next hour or 90 minutes together, and I'll answer some of your questions. Let's see. First one I have here, your favorite records, albums, musical artists. Do I have go-to genres, artists, albums while working on or doing certain things? Um, I certainly like, look, I'm a huge aficionado of poppy pop music. I loved I love a little Daft Punk in the afternoon when I feel like moving. I love a little who else? Bruno Mars. Yeah. Um 24 Karat Magic Man. That's just one of the greatest songs ever written. But in general, during the days I'm working, it's a pretty regular refrain of singer-songwriters. I listen to a lot of James Taylor, Sean Colvin, Casey Musgraves, Paul Simon, Simon and Garfunkel, also Milk Carton Kids. Uh, yeah, it's all stuff like that. I like the dulcet tones of your average troubadour. Yeah, I'm running into some limitations right now because my shop speaker is Alexa based, and when you ask her to make a playlist, and then next day you ask her to make a playlist of the same singer, you're going to get the same songs in the same order. There's not a lot of variance in Alexa on that front, um, and you can ask her to get more creative, but I haven't found that to be super fruitful. Um, yeah, that's somebody. if it's a pop song over closing credits, my wife will turn to me and be like, "I bet you like this song," and I'm like, "Yeah, I do. I might just download it," and I certainly do. I recently got a lot of fun songs to listen to from the soundtrack to Late Night, the Mindy Kaling, Emma Thompson movie, which, by the way, is freaking delightful. I've watched it 3 times now. We went and saw it in the theater, and we watched it twice at home. Um, Emma Thompson is an international treasure. She is a world treasure. She's a World Heritage treasure. Um, I've loved her since The Tall Guy and early Jeff. I can't quite remember. Um, but what I didn't know until I saw Late Night was that she's a comedian. She actually has real comedy chops and worked with people like Stephen Fry way back in the day. And that really shows in the movie Late Night, which is delightful. The movie Late Night also has a bunch of like some great pop dance music in the soundtrack, and I recently downloaded a whole bunch. James Taylor is just part of my DNA, and Paul Simon and Simon and Garfunkel, absolutely. Like those were the albums I was taking out of the library in high school to make my own mixtapes with. Yeah. Um, let's see. Hi, Adam. I want to know if you had to take 5 tools with you in case of a future apocalyptic scenario. If I could only choose 5 tools. By the way, whoever is making me choose 5 tools, if like whatever overlord says you have 5 tools, is a jerk because it's not nearly enough. But if I had to choose 5 tools, I'm going to assume that a multi-tool is allowed, even though there's like 20 tools on a multi-tool. So I'm going to choose a multi-tool as one of them. And I feel like that's probably cheating, but I think Jamie would choose that, so I'm going to call it as okay. Uh, a big hammer. Um, with the idea that I could do all light hammering I need to do with the same hammer, just carefully. But a big whacker in an apocalypse, you want the ability to whack stuff. You totally do. Uh, um, so big hammer, multi tool. Considering that pliers are on the multi tool, blade is on the multi tool, screwdrivers and stuff is on the multi tool. Um, a file, yeah, all of that. Um, Other tools I would take. I consider rope a tool. It's not just an expendable. So I would say, like, 300 to 600 feet of good climbing rope would be absolutely critical in an apocalypse. Um, I would assume that the scissors are also on them. This is actually an interesting exercise now that I'm thinking all the way through it. Uh, Tom Sachs and his team have been running a scenario called ISRU, in situ resource utilization, which is actually a phrase. I'm not sure if it's coined by NASA, but it's regularly used by NASA. Um, in situ resource utilization. The ultimate expression of ISRU is that moment in Apollo 13 where they have to make the oxygen scrubber and they literally have to fit a square peg into a round hole, or vice versa. Uh, and this question bears directly at what would you, what else would you need? In an apocalypse, I'd want the ability. It's almost like wheels are really important, like a hand truck, because you got to move stuff. You got to figure you got to move stuff. Is a car a tool? Can I consider a car a tool? This is definitely a longer answer than I'm going to be able to get to right here, but it's a good question. Um, Fire, the ability to make fire, a lighter, not a lighter. No, no. I'm going to need to bring a flint, a couple of flints, like long flints, flintstone or something like that. Um, Here's another question. When you worked at ILM on a project to create a model, how much artistic license were you given, or were you given plans? A little of both. And in there lies uh, a really important thing about work. Um, the thing about jobs, like I worked at Industrial Light and Magic in their model shop from 1998 until early 2003. So just around 5 years, 4.5 years. And it was ILM was the place I'd wanted to work since I was 10 years old when Star Wars first came out. And getting there, At the time that I did in 1998, I was 31 years old. My God, such a baby. I was 31 years old. Um, I had just spent 5 years cutting my teeth on 200 television commercials with Jamie, and then working in actual manufacturing and product design for Zoob, a building toy startup in the late 90s. And I showed up at ILM with all the skills. I showed up at ILM with a really terrific, useful coterie of skills. And so there's a lot of ways in which working in the ILM model shop was every bit as dreamy and awesome as I could have possibly hoped. The people there, the people that populated the ILM model shop are still some of my favorite people in the universe. Several of them had been there since Star Wars. I talk about the model shop in the past tense because it doesn't exist anymore. But many of my coworkers started in the 70s down in Southern California on the original Star Wars. And those gentlemen and ladies to the last were very generous with their information and their encouragement and their stories uh, and their request for advice and stuff. It was a very egalitarian shop where, and I mentioned this in the book I wrote last year, Every Tool's a Hammer. If you were working on something really cool, if you had a really awesome solution, uh, at one point I was working on a radar dish, and it needed to be curved, and I needed 8 identical radar dishes. I think maybe it was 4, but it was a number of them, and they all had to be this curved skeletal disc, which is kind of a big pain in the butt for a model maker to make. And so I ended up laser cutting this out of 32nd inch black acrylic, and then I lathed a shallow bowl, and I heat slumped this skeletal matrix laser cut out of black acrylic into the bowl to get the curve that I wanted. And it came out amazing. And while I was working on this, Lauren Peterson, one of the original seven model makers from Star Wars, came by my desk and he was like, "Oh, that's really cool." And then for the rest of the day or rest of the week, even other model makers came by. "Hey, I heard you working on something cool. Let's see that." And it was this way in which information propagated through the shop. So in all of those ways, it was a phenomenal place to work. All that being said, most of the work of the model shop was total drudgery, tedious to the most extreme degree, prepping cables and silvering the ends of wires to wire something up, uh, painting for days on end, drilling thousands of holes. Most of every job is drudgery. I submit that almost every job, the majority of your work is exhausting and tedious. And if you do that stuff really well, a certain period of the time, you get to do the fun stuff. Knowing that you can handle the full scope of the work in front of you and under your supervisor, you also frequently worked with and directly for an art director. So, for instance, on episodes 1 and 2, which I worked on, the Doug Chang would come through sometimes every day, mostly every third day, I think, to kind of see how everyone was doing. And my interaction and developing relationship with Doug Chang is a perfect illustration of how much artistic license one could be given. So in the beginning, I showed up and Larry Tan and I were working on Newt and Rune's shuttle, which lands on Naboo, and it's got these cool spider legs. And then at a certain point, once we'd finished detailing the outside, Larry went on to work on something else. God bless Larry Tan. He is an amazing man and was a lovely shepherd at the beginning of my tenure at ILM. And then it became time to design the loading bay that the doors open up and you see this ramp. And Doug gave me some initial sketches for how this should look. And as I started to execute them, he saw that I could make decisions that fit the aesthetic he was looking for. And so he gave me less guidance as I went. And that's the kind of way in which you earn the artistic license from the art director. You build trust with the people that you're working for. So this is the longest possible way of saying that the artistic license you got was earned. And it was earned based on an aesthetic relationship you had with your art director, production designer, and also your supervisor. Um, and frankly, those jobs in which you got a lot of artistic license were the most fun. One of my art directors, art director on Space Cowboy, Peter Rubin, was really, really delightful and given me lots of corners to express my creativity, while at the same time I was building a super high fidelity model of the space shuttle for Clint Eastwood and his compadres and space cowboys to gallivant around the loading bay of. Um, yeah, thank you. That's a great question. All right, let's see. What is currently your favorite movie, book, and TV show? I read. Okay, first of all, in this quarantine, reading is one of the casualties. I have not been able to read very much at all, which feels weird. But I'm finding myself lacking the attention span, and that does feel weird. Uh, I don't think that I could say I have a favorite book. For the longest time, I definitely said it was 100 Years of Solitude, which was definitely a really important book in my early 20s. It's still, I mean, obviously, it's one of the greatest books ever written. And there was a way in which, like, I intersected with it at a time that I could see how great it was, and that felt like a maturation as a reader, as an adult, as an imbiber of culture. But honestly, like, I read nonfiction and fiction sort of indiscriminately. I bounce back and forth. So right now, I literally just cracked a biography of Frederick Douglass, which I just finished the introduction to last night, and I've heard is really terrific, and I'm looking forward to reading it. Um, I also recently finished Murakami's latest novel, Killing Commendator. I'm not sure that's how you pronounce it, but I liked it so much I read it twice in a row. I mean, Murakami is maybe one of my favorite authors, along with like Michael Chabon, Raymond Chandler. Yeah, I have favorite authors. I have favorite places I want to go. Um, I mean, really, when it comes down to that, I think Raymond Chandler might be my all-time favorite author. And I love reading works by other authors inspired by Chandler, like The Yiddish Policeman's Union by Chabon or The Great Sheep Chase by Murakami. Both books clearly inspired by Chandler's very specific way of looking at the world. Um, TV show. The latest TV show that rocked my world and also made it a better place at the same time, is Watchmen. What Damon Lindelof and Regina King and the whole team did with Watchmen feels so important. It feels like such an interesting mirror. At just this time, we need this mirror. I watched all of Watchmen, and then I watched it again a second time with my wife. And I think now that my mom is sheltering with us, then we may watch it another time. My wife's second, my third, so that my mom can see it. Um, Book, movie, TV show, movie. Um, my world has been rocked by 1917. I was talking about it on one of the buffer attempts earlier. I love 1917. Oh, right. So this is what I was saying, but during the buffer earlier, I'm wearing a shirt that I normally don't wear, and I notice on camera because my nipples are sticking out, which they do on any given day. But I'm usually wearing a black T-shirt, so it's not so obvious. And what you don't know about me is that I tend to wear black T-shirts during the week, and I wear better quality, softer colored T-shirts on the weekends. Now, that's not exactly true now because we got all these wonderful T-shirts from Cotton Bureau, and they're just the best T-shirts ever made. They're super soft, so I wear great T-shirts all week long. I used to be wearing these old Express shirts that I wore during MythBusters, which are fine. They're just not as nice. Um, However, I was saying earlier, fusion that can happen with this sheltering in place, and I was reminded of a scene in 1917. Which, by the way, if you haven't seen it, please see it. It's rare that you watch a movie and are thinking while you're watching it, oh my gosh, this is one of my favorite movies, and I'm going to watch it many more times. And the fact is, I've already watched it twice and cracked parts of it a third time. Great moment when the two heroes of the film meet Andrew Scott, who you might know as the hot priest from season 2 of Fleabag, also Moriarty from Sherlock, a wonderful actor. and he lights up the screen for the 4 minutes or so, 5 minutes that he's on. But at one point, he's way up at the front. So our two heroes are back from the front in World War One. It's April 1917, and they're sent to go across no man's land. And so they're walking through the trenches, through the trenches. They get all the way up to the front where everyone is worn out, battle weary, and Andrew Scott is the like you know the only officer that hasn't been shot or something. And he says, as he's looking at their orders from the general to go through no man's land to get this message, Andrew Scott says, "Hey, settle a bet for us. What day is it?" And they say, "Friday." He goes, "Friday? Well, 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 none of us were right." It's a great line. I'm feeling that now. In fact, my wife has been making a little card she puts on the bedside table that says, "It's Tuesday," or Wednesday or Thursday or whatever day it happens to be. Um, that's the kind of stabilization we need these days. All right. So, yeah, let's see. What's your favorite book, movie, TV show? I think I've answered versions of all three of those. Look, I'm given to hyperbole. I use big adjectives for things all the time. I say brilliant and the best thing ever, and I recognize that I do that. Um, and yet, despite my love of hyperbole, I don't like saying a favorite of a thing because there's everything is so situational. There are movies I love watching with other people, like Jackie Brown. There are movies that are super important to my makeup aesthetically and storytelling wise, like Brazil, that I watch so many times. I'm not sure I can watch it anymore. I mean, I literally watched Brazil like over 200 times. That's another story. Um, so yeah, I tend to shy away from definitive answers to the Excelsior questions. But that's just me. My 8-year-old daughter would like to know if you have always had the same beard style. That is a great question. Please thank your daughter for that terrific question. Yes and no. Uh, I grew a goatee. I think that's what this is called, or a Van Dyke. I think if you wanted to get really specific, um, this I grew this in 1989, 1988, 88. Yes, and my girlfriend at the time thought it looked great when I was unshaven, and so I kept it going. And that's as good a reason as any to grow some facial hair. If your partner likes it, grow it. Everyone gets something out of it. And it changed my look, right? It totally changed my look. And so I've gone through a lot of different versions of how to shave this goatee. Um, I currently like it fairly, lean, fairly close cut. I don't like. There's a thing that can happen when you're maintaining a goatee, and that you'll wake up every morning and shave your cheeks, which is a weird thing to say, but yeah, that's exactly how that works. You wake up every morning, you shave this line, and if you don't take care, your goatee can start to grow outwards on your face, and like I don't like that kind of topography. I feel like that feels like an untended goatee to me on my face. I have no judgment for how anyone else manages their facial hair. Um, but so I've gone through many different phases. In the early days of MythBusters, when I let my mustache grow out too much, I start looking like an Irish cop. If I shaved my beard and just had the mustache, I would look like a narc, man. I look like I come from like 5 generations of Irish cops the moment I have only a mustache. Um, but in addition, there I have gone through many phases of the other parts of my facial hair, which are my chops here, and this has been a longer term development that I never thought I would be a guy with sideburns. I literally never did. This is probably more information than anyone needs to know. But at some point on MythBusters, during one of the seasons in the early aughts, like 2007, 2008, I think, I grew a break beard. So over the 3 weeks of Christmas, I just didn't shave at all. And I let my beard grow really heavy like that. And then as I was shaving it, I left some pork chops. And my wife was like, "I like those pork chops." And I was like, "Well, they're going to stay then." And it actually it actually has become a really important part of the facial hair matrix. I particularly like the way I'm able to describe a jawline that I don't have by using the way I cut the sideburns and the goatee. If I shave my goatee, you'd notice that I have not much of a chin. So it's like a friend of mine said, "Oh my God, it's like makeup with hair." And it's exactly like makeup with hair. I am drawing new lines on my face using how I cut my facial hair, and I feel good about it. So yeah, it is a work in progress. Um, Actually, recently I was letting my pork chops grow really bushy here, and it's not like I look in the mirror and think I don't look great. It's that I look in the mirror and I think, wow, I look kind of older and crazier. What's going on with that? Seriously. Um, that's what happened. Like 3 days ago, I noticed my chops getting bushy, and I was like, I didn't notice they were getting bushy. I was looking in the mirror and I'd be like, why do I look old and crazy? Oh, it's because my pork chops are getting really bushy. And for some reason on me, I feel like that makes me look old and crazy. Same, the other part of this is Jamie and I both noticed this in the latter seasons of Mythbusters, like around probably 2014, 2013. Both of us noticed that there's a certain age at which 1 day's growth on a man makes you look like a cautionary tale instead of just like ruggedly handsome. I don't know what it is, and it's probably different for every dude. But like in your 20s, 1 day's growth is like I'm just muscling through it like any working guy. And in your late 40s and early 50s, 1 day's growth is like I've been kicked out of the house and haven't had a place to sleep in 3 days. That's what that felt like. So no, I while I have in the broadest sense always had a goatee for 30 plus years, it's gone through many different phases and changes, uh, very subtle ones, as I have learned how to tend the garden that is my face. Thank you for that awesome question. Okay, let's see here. That baker chap asks, I was wondering, do you ever paint or draw for pleasure, not just for making plans or schematics? I do. I do draw for pleasure occasionally. Often when I'm traveling, uh, I do, and I like drawing for pleasure. I like sitting down and drawing what I see in front of me. I like doing a drawing of, a public park or a piece of art that I like. That definitely happens, but it's way, way, way less frequent than drawing for plan making. Um, and it's funny because I know that, excuse me just a second. I know that if I drew more for pleasure, I'd get better at drawing. I'm totally aware of drawing. Um, the sketches that I have in my notebooks, in my sketchbooks that I have done from life, from things in front of me, are always really inspiring. They're way different than I thought they would turn out. Um, Yeah, there's an honesty to drawing just the thing in front of you and really committing to that. There's something I really like about it because it also feels like you're capturing some piece of a thing. And also, you know, a couple of years ago, my wife and I spent, wow, it's like a year and a half ago now. We spent Thanksgiving week in Mexico City, which is so beautiful, such a gorgeous city. We were in some park in the Contessa, and we just sat at the end of this lane, and I sketched the lane for about 30 minutes. And that drawing now evokes that moment in time. It evokes that day, that hour, the interactions my wife and I were having, and even the meal we went and had later. I actually remember because that drawing puts such a place on it. Um, and it's not to say that drawing plans and doing iterations of designs isn't pleasurable because it's super, super pleasurable. Activates all my good endorphins. Thank you, that baker chap. Edible Light wants to know, hey Adam, how are you finding working on your cave on your own? Yeah, you know, that's been fascinating. Obviously, I am a person who is an extrovert, but I am an introvert extrovert mix. So I like being, I thrive being around. I thrive working with people. I really enjoy the process of working with people in general, and I love working with the tested team specifically. Uh, and so not seeing them is tough. Not having their direct interaction on a daily, weekly basis is not fun. At the same time, I'm very much appreciating the mental quietude that I've been having in the shop. Like, there's a way in which that feels good. I mean, I say that recognizing the great privilege I have to have this shop close to my house, and it is a place that I can go. Uh, so it's not like I'm sitting in the shop thinking, boy, I'm really lonely. Really, what I'm mostly thinking is, boy, I wish I had the inspiration to actually make something, because mostly what I have is I have the inspiration to clean my shop and fix things in it. But the idea of making something new aesthetically is weirdly distant from me right now. And I'm seeing a lot of that. You know, I think there'll be a lot of unpacking of this time over the ensuing decades. And I think a lot of people will report the same thing. Um, you know, so the answer is complicated. The answer is I really am liking the sort of quiet meditative space that this time is engendering. Uh, it's allowing me, it's lowering the volume on the sort of regular life that I have been living. Um, and that quietude gives me a lot of chance for reflection, which is good. And I miss my friends. I miss my friends. So I'm finding the hardest part of this sequestration is just not having dinner with my close friends. I miss them all greatly, and we've been FaceTiming with our friends, and we've been doing lots of Zoom meetings, and we've even gone to friends' houses and like talked to them from their window and from their balcony and such. Uh, but it's not the same. It's not the same as sharing a meal or playing some good card games with good friends. That is sorely missed. Um, but we've got a lot more time. Uh, so it may be that a project grabs me. It's that I don't feel like I can think in any kind of long term, right? Like I start on a project like, a spacesuit, and I know that that's going to be weeks and weeks of work. And for the kind of project work that I do, that might be weeks and weeks spread out over a year or 2 years, or in the case of my alien spacesuit, 14 years. But right now, the idea of a long term project just sounds it's just not something I'm interested in. I want to do things that I can do right now, like today and tomorrow. The idea of the long grind of a big project does not inspire me right now. So the idea of like the thing I was doing during the first two live streams, building the Eagle Moss Ecto One from Ghostbusters. Uh, hopefully I'll get some new parts soon, and I'll start back on that. That is like the ideal project for me right now. Just one instruction at a time, a group of parts, some things to do, very, very straightforward. That's just like that feels like exactly my speed at this moment in time. Uh, okay. Um, Mr. Dr. Detroit, nice Dan Aykroyd reference. Mr. Dr. Detroit asks, are there any movie franchises you love the idea of but can't get into? Hmm. Well, I mean, uh, of course, I appreciate some of the mechanical ingenuity that is in the Saw movies, but they are not my cup of tea when it comes to watching movies. I don't like horror, and I don't like uh, gratuitous gore. So, like Saw and Hostel and Purge, stuff like that, it's not my kind of films. Yeah, it's not the kind of aesthetic interaction I want to have with my viewing experiences. Um, horror is one in which I know there's great things being done. And I love some horror movies. I love Ringu. I love The Descent, which by every account is like one of the scariest horror movies. I find it really exciting and delightful. I mean, it's got a fabulous cast. I think led by Lena Headey, who's just brilliant. Um, but in general, uh, I stay away from horror movies too because I don't like being scared. And then every now and then someone makes me watch one, and I'm like, "Oh, that was really fun!" And yet, left to my own devices, I'm not like interested in delving into horror. Yeah. Um, so it's not necessarily franchises, it's genres that I can wrap my head around that I like, I love the idea of, but can't get into. Um, look, I think the idea that a horror director works with, which is like how to create a space that's genuinely scary from the safety of your own home, is a really interesting aesthetic challenge. I I just when I'm looking for a certain kind of experience, the one of feeling compromised by fear or disgust, those just aren't emotions that I'm looking for on an aesthetic level. Um, Panda King '01. Well, I'm glad you got the '01 in there, just so that everyone else has to choose a higher number. Panda King '01 wants to know, "Hey Adam, I was wondering, do you and MythBusters crew still talk?" Yeah, we totally do. In fact, when Grant Imahara's unbelievable Baby Yoda animatronic went live, I tweeted about it the second I saw it, and then I texted him and was like, "Dude, this is amazing." And I were all colleagues long before MythBusters. Mary Byron's just like a force of nature on the social media. It's delightful to watch the things that she promotes and the wonderful. I love her posting all of her sculptures during the sheltering in place. Um, um, but hang on, I'm just going to text the person who was calling and tell them that I can't talk because it's one of my kids. Um, right, can't talk right now. Call later. Such good news. Um, yay. Uh, my son had a problem with one of his pieces of electronics this morning, and we were workshopping it. I am almost ready to post. I noticed in my Twitter, my text feed with my son is a picture of my hand, my finger yesterday. Um, Many of you know, I think most of you know that I injured the crap out of my finger a week and a half ago on my lathe. Yeah, my lathe. And the original shot of my finger all torn up is not for public consumption. It's pretty freaking gory. However, uh, I am going to post this. We'll see if we can get this up on social media because here's a picture of my hand and it's healing remarkably fast. It's healing like stupid fast. Okay, so doctors of Twitter, I am unexperienced with hand wounds of this magnitude healing this quickly. And I'm curious if the fact that I had it irrigated, disinfected, and butterflied literally within 10 minutes of the accident, does that speed? Because usually you do the accident, you go to the emergency room, you sit there and wait for all the people who are more injured than you to get served. And then, like 3 hours later, someone's sewing up your finger. If the difference between 10 minutes and 3 hours is a significant difference, or if I've just been taking good care of it, I'm not sure. Um, all right. With a doctor who was trying to design a thing to handle the front lines of the coronavirus some technology to help frontline people on working on coronavirus. And the specific challenge they were asking for was something that was not as much in my wheelhouse as Jamie's. So I called him up and talked to him last week for the first time. I don't think we've talked in the better part of a year. Is that really true? I think it's possible. Called him up, got him on the first ring, and we chatted for a second. Talked about how we were weathering this current storm, and then I laid out the problem and said, "Would you mind if I put you in touch with these folks?" And he said, "No, no problem at all." And so I did. But yeah, we are all some wonderful pictures from a wedding of one of my MythBusters colleagues to another good friend, and we've got some lovely pictures of some of our MythBusters crew hanging out in other countries. Yeah, still very close with a large portion of the MythBusters crew, and that's another delight in my life. Um, let's see. Chris Feltner asks, "What would you want to what who would you want to come do a 1 day build if you could get anyone to come in to do a 1 day build? Anyone, anyone. Um, so as broad as that question is, I'll tell you where my brain goes. My brain goes to Theo Janssen, designer and artist and designer of the strand-based and the amazing walking wind sculptures he makes that populate the beaches of Northern Europe. And he's come here for a show. We've actually met. He's been to the cave. Uh, one of my heroes. I would love to build a strand-based with Theo. I'd also love to do some woodworking with Nick Offerman, a friend who we've both agreed we would love to make something together. We've just never gotten around to doing it. Other people that would, you know what? I'd love to make a piece of furniture with Jack White. We've talked about that. We've talked about making stuff together, and again, we've just never gotten around to it. Um, and you'll notice I'm not going to some like I'd love to build a 1 day build with Leonardo da Vinci. I have no idea. Da Vinci could have been a total dick. Who knows? Um, but I gravitate towards people that I like because working with someone is more than just working with their brilliance or their particular skill set. It's working with a human being. And so, like when I think of 1 day builds, I don't just think of somebody whose aesthetic or output is amazing to me. I also think of people whose personalities I find simpatico with mine, because that's what makes a build a real pleasure. Um, you know, it just occurred to me that it'd be great to do a 1 day build with Jamie. Um, people ask what I miss from MythBusters, and I my most frequent answer to what I miss about MythBusters is my crew. It's standing there with a cup of coffee at the edge of an empty parking lot at the beginning of a day, talking to Steve-O and Saws and saying, what if a car came from over that hill and then we addressed this thing over here and then we set everything up on the X and we got some drone shots of that. Like that, the most fun. I miss those moments. I still get them, right? I still get them when I made Savage Builds, when I made Mythbusters Junior and other shows. Um, but I haven't talked about how much I miss making and designing experimental methodologies with the Heinemann. Like, and the things that we've talked about, both of us in the past, about how we're not friends, we don't get along very well, we fight about everything, is really true. We did fight about everything. Well, I thought I'd tape it up using duct tape. Well, what about masking tape? Oh, and then we were just like off to the races, right? Everything got checked by each other. There was nothing that just like went through, right? And that was annoying on a petty level. But frankly, there were moments of surpassing flow. Yeah, flow. There were moments of surpassing flow with Jamie, and I'll call out two of them. One of them was while doing the Pirates of the Caribbean, Could You Walk Underwater Holding On to a Boat? Which is patently absurd. It's a Bugs Bunny kind of physics, right? Um, a boat could hold, I don't know, let's say 3,000 pounds of water in a medium sized dinghy. You could hold 3,000 pounds of water in that dinghy. That means when that dinghy is upside down and holding in air, the pressure on it is 3,000 pounds of buoyancy pulling that thing up. So when we set up that experiment on the bottom of a public pool in Oakland, California, we were able to commandeer for the day. We put this boat upside down, and then we used breathable air tanks to fill it with air at the same time as we were weighing it down with enough weight to hold it. But right, you start to see the tension. we've got this buoyant thing we're holding down with weights, and then we're adding to its buoyancy, which means we're setting up this really tricky system, which could be highly dangerous because it wants to revert to the mean. And Jamie and I were both not only super conscious of the danger and difficulty of setting up this methodology of getting this boat upside down, getting it filled with water, and seeing if you could hold it down, but we did most of the work underwater, both of us in scuba gear, and we don't have the ability to talk to each other in standard scuba gear. And there was no loss of communication, none whatsoever. We're there underwater. He'll tap me on the shoulder and be like, the thing in and I'd say, absolutely. And we would be able to speak in hand signals and understand detailed paragraphs of methodologies using just those hand signals. Both of us found that pretty remarkable. And then later on in MythBusters tenure, I think in the second to last season, we were doing a myth about glass falling from a height and slicing somebody in half. I think that, yeah, we were doing it at a fire tower in Santa Rosa. And in order to do this experiment, we had to, the top of the fire tower had a standard, like 3 foot high cinder block railing that was as wide as a cinder block. And in order to set up our experimental methodology, we had to weld a steel frame that sat on that roof edge and cantilevered out over our experimental space. At the end of the day, it was incumbent on us to remove this ring out of a piece of plate glass, slicing right through a film. We're all done with the filming. I think we're shooting this on a wide time lapse. So I'm up on the roof, and Jamie comes up on a cherry picker of the various pieces of earth moving equipment that I have been lucky enough to use and abuse over the years. Cherry pickers are my least favorite. Being high up in a cherry picker is awful, awful. You're every time you move, the whole thing goes back and forth. And once you're like 30 feet up, really, even only 20 feet up, you look down and the base that is holding you up. I know it weighs tens of thousands of pounds, but from the cherry picker bucket, it looks like it's a postage stamp. So you do not feel stable, both in a visual standpoint and from a rocking back and forth standpoint. So cherry pickers, awful. I've heard tell that there is like a 200-foot cherry picker. That would literally be a hellscape for me. I would not want to get in one of those. I've been in one at, I think, 70 feet, and that was terrifying for life. Okay, but I digress. So I'm up on the roof of this fire tower, which is like 70 feet off the ground and 60 feet off the ground. And Jamie comes up in a bucket lift. And the way we have to get this thing off is that, and if we do a lot, that's really dangerous. So we clear a perimeter, we tell everyone to clear out, and then we're sitting there doing this. And again, we're not speaking very much. So it's the end of the day, the light is crepuscular, the sun is setting, and Jamie's there in the cherry picker, and he's slowly doing these little movements while I'm giving signals and this way, and we're kind of doing this thing. And it is a total flow state. It is one of those moments in which you both just firing on every cylinder and our brains are running on parallel tracks. And it's a deeply pleasurable experience to build with someone like that. And we get the rig hooked onto his cherry picker so he can slowly lower it down. And as he's lowering it down, he looks up and he says, "It's a pleasure working with you, Mr. Savage." And I said, I was thinking the same thing, Mr. Heineman. You too. And then he went down. That is about the most affection either of us has ever expressed for the other. That's one of my favorite MythBuster stories. All right. Let's see. Have you ever tried crochet or knitting? I have not. I admit I have not. I'm a big fan of the art form. Amazing things can happen from it. I have some incredible crocheted and knitted face huggers. I have a scarf custom made by a fan that has the theme song to Doctor Who embedded in binary in the pattern of the scarf. That is like nerdvana to me. But no, I have never taken it up myself. Um, I'm sort of gonna burn a crocheting commission that I'm trying to find someone to work with to make this thing for me. Um, and at no point in this did I think maybe I should do this myself. And maybe I should, now that you bring that up. Um, because I read a lot of crocheters and knitters on Twitter sharing tips and tricks and techniques, and I see the results and the satisfaction. Um, what is that great? What is there's a great? Is it a TED talk? Someone who knitted oh, no, it's Julia Sweeney's amazing piece about knitting a scarf for a boyfriend who she was broken up with by the time the scarf was finished. Is that really true? Yeah, I love that story. But no, I have never tried crocheting or knitting, but not to say that I never will. I seem to be buffering a lot more. I am sorry for this. I'm going to take one last question, and then hopefully we will figure out a way to get Comcast to get something more reliable here so we don't have to suffer through this next week. I hope to have this problem solved by next week. Here we go. What is the first thing you are planning to do when the quarantine is over? Okay, that is a great question, but I think it's the wrong question. That question has a fallacy built into it. And the fallacy in that question is that things will be normal again, that there is some look, we turned a switch, right? At a certain point, everyone started saying shelter in place. San Francisco was luckily one of the early United States cities to do that, and I feel very grateful for that. The numbers right now are I'm optimistic about our numbers in this town. There are still states that have not done that, and I think that's crazy and insane. Uh, but while it felt like a switch got turned for us to shelter in place, right? Like life was normal somewhere in early February, and then all of a sudden it wasn't. It's not, the reverse will not be true. I don't think we're going back to what we had. And I think that's actually one of the key sources of my personal stress because I don't know what kind of world I'm going to be looking at on the other side of this. Look, I know 10 years from now, I am most likely an alive person who's sleeping in a bed and eating food and living with my partner and, seeing my friends and my family. I have no doubt 10 years from now, those things will be true. But under what circumstances of government, society, culture, etc., I haven't the slightest notion. So while absolutely I am looking forward to certain things that I don't get to do right now, chief among them, seeing my friends, spending time with my loved ones, hugging my sons, hugging the people that I love. I really look forward to doing that. Um, at the same time, I am not thinking of this as like, oh man, once I get out of here. No, I think it's we're living in this liminal space right now. Um, and this calls to mind one of my favorite bits of literature, which is Letters to a Young Poet by Rilke. And in Letters to a Young Poet, at one point, Rilke is counseling the young poet on sadness. And he says, and I'm going to butcher this quote, but I'm getting it mostly right. He says, I think we find our moments of sadness terrifying because we find ourselves standing in a place that we cannot remain standing. The past has left us, but the future has not yet taken hold. This is a great description to me. It resonated the moment I read it in my early 20s. I underlined it in the copy of the book that I still have, and I've quoted it hundreds of times since then because it's such an important insight into the way in which that sadness manifests. Um, and Ram Dass has this wonderful quote where he says, only total despair precedes a change in consciousness. And in my experience, that is absolutely true of my life. Uh, that the real shifts in our mental understanding of how things work, the real emotional shifts we make in confronting our past and our coping mechanisms and the ways in which we navigate through the world, those real shifts occurred and it felt like total despair was the precedent, even though it's not. But so Rilke then says, it is because of this, when you're in this liminal state where the past has left you and the future has not yet taken hold, Rilke says this is why it is so important to be, and in the translation I have, it says to be lonely and attentive. Lonely and attentive. And I love the translation, and I will figure out which translator put out this book of letters to a young poet and post it when this video goes live so that you can get the same copy, because really I find the language much better than any of the other translations of letters to a young poet. Lonely and attentive is a fabulous word pairing, because when you're sad, you certainly, like by definition, when I feel sad, I feel lonely. I feel alone in that sadness. And I think a lot of us are feeling that right now. Um, but attentive, attentive. Like I said at the beginning of this, I'm finding the quietude of being very fruitful for self. And I'm a big believer in self reflection. I've been in therapy for most of my life. My mom's a therapist, my wife's a therapist. Um, I believe in the talking cure. Uh, and what Rilke says is when you are lonely and attentive at that moment of sadness. And so I'm thinking globally, here I am in this moment of sadness where terrible things are happening. We are staying in place to try and prevent further terrible things from happening. We don't know what kind of world we're going to witness, create, be part of, be subject to when all this is over. And all of those things involve choices that we'll have to make. And that liminal state is terrifying. Nobody likes change. Nobody likes change. Nobody really likes change. Uh, but if you are attentive, Rilke says, that's when the future starts to take hold in you. And in my experience as an emotional, thinking, self reflective human, I find that to be inexorably the case. That if you are lonely and attentive at a moment of sadness, that is when the future really starts to take hold. That's where you build the foundation for the next stage of your understanding of the world. Um, and so I am not really planning on any specific thing for when this virus scare is over. I hope that I am remaining lonely and attentive to be able to be part of whatever solution rises out of the ashes of this really difficult time. And so that is where I will leave this. That got way deeper philosophically than I intended it to. I hope that provides some interesting insight into my thinking process. And I hope you guys are all safe and sound and with your families and not driving each other too crazy. Um, it is a difficult time, and I am with you in this. And I love you guys, and stay safe and stay sheltered in place for the time being. And I look forward to bumping elbows with y'all and hugging some of y'all when all this is over. Thanks very much. See you guys next week. Bye. All right, let's turn this puppy off.